Now, all this comes as British Prime Minister Liz Truss told the Israeli premier that she's reviewing a relocation of the country's embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, this is according to a report in the British newspaper The Telegraph. Truss, however, was campaigning on the UK's decision to remain in Tel Aviv before she became the British leader. For more on all this, let's bring in I-24 News International Affairs correspondent Batya Leventhal. She joins me live in studio this morning. Batya, good morning to you. A new press release from the government in the United Kingdom says that the Middle East peace process was one of the things they discussed there in their meetings on the sideline of the General Assembly. We also know that free trade was one of those topics as well. But what do we know about cooperation between the two countries so far?
Right, well, it was quite interesting that this was brought up, not necessarily in the British press, but in an official press release by the British government. At the moment, in terms of a lot of the topics, most of them are being brought up only in Israeli press. And so to see this coming out as an official statement is definitely making a stand. Last week, when I spoke with the British ambassador to Israel, Neil Wiggin, before he ended up going to the Queen's funeral, he mentioned that ties were becoming much closer now with the signing of the free trade agreement. You have to remember that when the UK was part of the EU, it was sort of concised to this block in terms of how many deals that they could make. And now that it's sort of its own entity and its own sovereign, it's expanding its trade relations, it's expanding its anything to do with its culture, its media, and all of that has to do with the free trade agreement that it's now signed with Israel. But obviously, the most important thing taking the center stage here is Iran, with the UK obviously being a partner to the Iran nuke deal, and Israel obviously criticizing that and being very, very opposed to what they call a bad deal, with Yair Lapid calling for something that is longer and stronger in order to quite solidify that. So that definitely took center stage in terms of their meeting.
And let's talk about this next topic here. Truss saying that she might move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. We did see the United States make this move that did draw a lot of criticism, and that also was a message to the Palestinians that perhaps the Americans would never recognize a Palestinian state after solidifying Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. So how do we know if, one, this will happen, and two, what it will do to UK policy inside the country and abroad?
I think that's the key, is how do we know that this is going to happen? And it seems like there's two schools of thought here. On the one, they are saying Liz Truss, as the British Prime Minister, has only been in power less than a month. And also with the Israeli Prime Minister, Yair Lapid, he's an interim Prime Minister for the time being. So the one camp is saying that there's a lot to prove, which is why Yair Lapid, as you mentioned, first time a statement is being made about a two-state solution at such a global platform. But also with Liz Truss possibly coming into this role as, you know, a female British Prime Minister who may seem that she's got a lot to prove in terms of her own domestic politics coming forward with this. The other camp is saying that this is really seen as a breakaway of UK-British policy. As I mentioned, in terms of the EU, they very much stood on the side of criticism and a much stronger and harsher tone towards the Jewish state. But now that they are sort of this free entity, they are seemingly moving away from that. And considering the fact that the Conservative Party is what's been in power in the UK, a move like this does not seem as shocking or as surprising, but it definitely does signal a strong jerk away from what has been UK policy for years, although it's very important to point out that although they are considering moving the embassy, they have always considered Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and that's a policy that has stayed, but this would be a mark, a sharp turn from their original policy.
I-24 News International Affairs correspondent Batya Leventhal joining me live this morning to discuss all things from the UN General Assembly and the sidelines of it. Thank you.
Thank you.